Welcome to Conversations with Big Rich. This is an interview-style podcast. Those interviews are all involved in the off-road industry. Being involved, like all of my guests are, is a lifestyle, not just a job. I talk to competitive teams, racers, rock crawlers, business owners, employees, media, and private park owners, men and women who have found their way into this exciting and addictive lifestyle. We discuss their personal history, struggles, successes, and reboots. We dive into what drives them to stay active in off-road. We all hope to shed some light on how to find a path into this world we live and love and call off-road.
Whether you're crawling the Red Rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
Have you seen 4Low magazine yet? 4Low magazine is a high-quality, well-written, four-wheel drive-focused magazine for the enthusiast market. If you still love the idea of a printed magazine, something to save and read at any time, 4Low is the magazine for you. 4Low cannot be found in stores, but you can have it delivered to your home or place of business. Visit 4lowmagazine.com to order your subscription today. On today's episode of Conversations with Big Rich, we have James Schofield. James has been around the off-road industry for quite a while. We'll get into his long history. He's been all over, East Coast, West Coast. And actually, he was a participant or actually witnessed one of the funniest moments in my off-road career. And we'll discuss that. That happened in Alabama at a race. And James, thank you for coming on and spending some time with us and talking about yourself.
Man, I appreciate you having me on the show.
So let's just jump right in and get started. And where were you born and raised?
I was born in Annapolis, Maryland. Grew up in a little town outside of that called Gambrills, Maryland. Went to grade school there up to 4th grade, and then my parents divorced, and my mom moved to Alabama, and my 2 older sisters and I ended up living with my mother, so we moved to Alabama in like 91 or something like that, and grew up through the rest of elementary school and middle school and high school in Alabama, and then the real world hit when you have to get a job and
well, before we
like
get
that.
into all that, let's explore your childhood a bit.
Okay.
You said Maryland, outside of Annapolis.
Yep.
Was it rural or was it more suburban?
I would say back then it was probably pretty. I would say that town back then probably didn't have that many people in it, but today it's probably the same size as Annapolis, and
okay,
with everything the way the world is right now with growth. But back then I would say it was kind of a small town for sure.
And did you have to walk to school? Did you get a ride to school
so
or
the cool
bus?
part about that neighborhood that my parents lived in, the school was like behind the neighborhood, so you could walk to school. They didn't have the bus. Like, we lived so close that you didn't have to take a bus or your parents drop you off. You could just, my parents would go to work before we left to go to school, and then my parents would just assume that we made it to school every day.
So more like when I grew up, I guess what we call it now is latchkey kids. You'd get yourself off to school and then get back and get home and hopefully have your homework done before you went out and played with your friends and your parents got home.
That's right. And then if the street lights came on and you weren't home, that was it.
Yeah, you knew what your timing was.
Exactly.
So what about Alabama? Was that rural as well?
So we moved to a small town called Eufaula, which is not a very big town. It's more of like a 3 or 4 red light type town, and very like farmland type, I guess like industry there would be more like paper mill farm type stuff, or like building buildings, like prefab buildings for like metal building shops and stuff like that, but not a very big town.
So rural again. And what did you, same thing there? Walk to school, bus? How was it?
So in elementary school, I had to take a bus, which we could walk to the middle school, and then the bus that dropped off middle school kids would take you to the elementary school. So, and then once I finished 5th grade, and we went to 6th, 7th, and 8th was middle school down here. So you could just walk to school and then walk home, and then the high school was kind of directly across the street from the middle school. So not a very big, drive or walk to school either way.
Okay.
But once I got to high school, I drove. So
Excellent. So then what kind of things did you do as a kid besides school? How'd you occupy your time?
So I guess like in like middle school was just playing outside, because my mother didn't allow you to kind of come in and out of the house a million times in one day, or she would just kind of lock the door after you walked outside. So it was kind of you're out until your time to come in, and just hanging out with friends. A lot of that doesn't seem to happen nowadays, but you could tell whose house to go to on your way home from school just by where the bikes were and stuff like that in certain people's yards. So a lot of that is kind of gone by the wayside, but that's what we did. You would walk home and you would pass through your, certain yards or whatnot, and then you would stop and hang out for a little bit. But when you got back to your house, you had to do your schoolwork or whatnot. And then once I got to high school, so middle school, I played football, 7th and 8th grade. And then once I got to high school, man, you were just trying to figure out what you were doing with yourself. And, football was the only thing that's really big down here. As far as sports go. So if you didn't play football, basically you're a nobody in the South, as bad as it is. But that's kind of how it is. And lucky enough, I got to play football. So when there wasn't football going on, like the coach would make you do like track and field just to keep you doing something, or soccer, just trying to keep you in shape to where you're not starting over from scratch at the spring training when it comes around.
And what position did you play?
I played nose guard and defensive tackle, and then did long snapper for like field goals and punts.
Oh, nice. You can make a career just out of being a long snapper.
100%, man. 100%.
And how did you guys do as a school or team in your conference or division?
So in my high school, we were between what they call a 5A and a 6A school. For the majority of my high school year, I think we started out, when I first got into high school, I was like a 6A school. And then once I got to like a 10th grader, I want to say we went down to a 5A. And then we finished out 5A school based on size. But we ended up finishing, I think we got down to like the semifinals in the state, which was doing pretty good back then. Like in my opinion, we were doing it. We were winning your regionals and stuff like that. But then like when you had to play the bigger schools from out of town, it was kind of you're playing against teams that are basically all they do is football. And
they have a lot bigger draw, so the chance of them having premier athletes is better when they have a larger draw to pull a team from.
Exactly.
That's good though. So what did you learn about life when you look back on your football days in, say, grade school and high school?
I would say the biggest thing that I kind of got out of football and stuff like that is being a team sport is you can't quit. So you can apply that to just about anything, whether it is, you know, building parts or building a buggy or working on something. Like, you're going to go through every emotion you can possibly have in any kind of challenge that you're doing, but don't quit, you know, just keep going. Just because you're down a couple, you know, touchdowns or points or whatever, the game's not over until it's over. And I've been a part of many races or race teams that have had that kind of bad luck. You feel like you can't do anything, and then you come out on the other end as a winner, and it's because you don't quit.
Right.
You know?
Once you commit, no quit.
Yeah, exactly.
And how were you as a student?
I was terrible.
Really?
Just being honest with you, like, I hated school as much as anybody else that was looking forward to after-school activities of some sort, or chasing a girlfriend or whatnot. I didn't excel in really anything except for math. Like, that to me is weird, because out of everything else, I figured math would be like the worst thing I would be good at. But I use that every day, you know, so figuring calculations out and stuff like that, that's what I use the most every day, which is surprising. And looking back, I just never really paid attention. I was too busy just having a good time instead of trying to focus. That was being the class clown, or whatever you want to call it, was, you know, way more fun than paying attention.
Right. A lot of us suffered that.
Exactly. So I guess you could say I have what they call ADD, like crazy. But to me, I just grew up with it. So I would rather have everybody laughing than have to have a study class, you know, like
where you could hear a pin drop. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right on. So back in those early days, what was your modes of transportation before you got a car? Did you have bikes, or what'd you do?
Yeah, bicycles. Just bicycles and skateboards and stuff like that. But, like, the roads in Alabama are very rocky asphalt, not real smooth, so there's not you know, using a skateboard on the roads isn't the best. So bicycles is what we used the majority of the time. It's a decent-sized neighborhood that we lived in, so you could kind of bike from one person's house in one side of the neighborhood to the other, all the way back to your house, and it wasn't too bad.
And do you still carry friends from that era, from, say, high school?
Yeah, I've got, I would say, like, I think there was like 170-something people in my graduating class. I would say that I'm probably still pretty decent friends with about 40 of them, you know, but everybody's kind of grown up and gone into something else, or moved off, or doesn't even look like they used to look, so I wouldn't be able to pick them out in the crowd.
Right.
So,
have you ever? So you've not gone back to a high school reunion?
I went to my 10th year reunion, and it wasn't terrible, but, you know, there's a lot of people that should have, by the social standards, should have been successful in high school, right out of high school, and, you know, now they work at Walmart. I'm not knocking that, but, like, they were, you know, on to bigger and better things, and then they end up working at a Walmart. So it's kind of like interesting, in my opinion, on how people end up, you know, what life choices they've made and how they ended up where they end up.
Yeah, that's true. It's been interesting. You know, it's been a long time since I've been in high school, but
Right.
It's very interesting to see. I still got my two closest friends from high school that I communicate with all the time, and then one guy from college, and then got people that I didn't communicate with in high school because of social media have now become extended friends.
Right.
And some of them I met, you know, we reintroduced each other, you know, to each other, and we weren't even friends in high school, but because of having the 49er season tickets and selling those, that people would come in, you know, from the from the school, because we were all most of us were Niner fans, having grown up in that area, and guys buying tickets so they can go to the games, and it's kind of it's interesting to see what people are doing,
For sure.
and,
Yeah,
and
see where everybody ends up.
one of the things that blew me away is how many of the kids that I went to high school with had passed away within probably the first 10 years.
Wow.
It was kind of crazy.
Yep.
So what did high school, what'd you do after high school?
After high school, I went to work at like a more or less like a mom and pop style trucking company, and just trying to learn the ropes of like working on big trucks and stuff like that. And then I worked there for like 2 years, and then went to Kenworth and went through their kind of program to get you into being able to work on basically on the line doing truck work. And I did that for a while, and the whole Blue Torch thing came about, and then it was just like a after hours, after your day job, and a couple nights a week we were doing something under the Blue Torch name. And then once it got sustainable to support myself and Dan, we both kind of quit our day jobs and did that.
So when did you and Dan go to school together, or did you live in the same neighborhood?
I met Dan in Dothan, which is like an hour or so south of Eufaula. That's the town I grew up in. And I had a Jeep Cherokee that had a big lift on it and 35s and all that kind of good stuff. And he was doing a bunch of trail Jeeps and stuff like that, and rode by, saw a shop one day, and kind of hit it off, and then started doing odds and end jobs for him on the projects that he was doing before it was even a business. And then it kind of turned into, if we make this bracket as a sellable item, it would be, you basically hit print at a laser shop, and then the next guy would want the same cage or the same truss or the same tabs, and then kind of the rest is history from there.
Okay. Let's talk about your first vehicle.
Okay.
What was the first vehicle you got to drive?
81 Chevy Malibu.
81 Chevy Malibu. Now there's a chick getter.
I'm telling you, man. So the cool part is I was 16 long before a few of my buddies were. So that was the car we got to get around in. And, looking back, the car was nothing to write home about, but it served its purpose, man. And it was like it kind of brought everybody together where you didn't have to have, some high-end car to be a cool kid, basically. You just had to have four wheels and a tank of gas, and everybody would get along. And I treated that car terrible for what it's worth. It did many dirt roads at 80 miles an hour, and no wonder it stayed together. But then I got into a Jeep Cherokee, so like a 93 Jeep Cherokee, four-door, and it was nice. Good change. I had AC and all that kind of stuff, and it wasn't carbureted, so it would run kind of any day of the week, no matter what you did. And started putting a lift on it and stuff like that. And I want to say I probably put 2 or 3 different lifts on it, and then I ended up with a rock crawler long arm kit when they first came out, and put 35s on it and stuff like that, and then got into the lock rights and stuff, and you start figuring out how weak a 30 and a 35 actually are, and kind of got to tone back your driving style a little bit, but especially when you got to driving on the street every day after you're done wheeling it. So.
And what was your wheeling like in that area?
For a Jeep Cherokee, there was very minimal that you could do without just trying to yard sale your Jeep to get to where you're going. But there was a couple groups that we had, like some guys were on 39s or 38s back in the day, and, cut boggers and stuff like that you would ride with. But you could take like the, more bypass trails where you could actually go to the trail, watch them do their thing while you took the leaf looker bypass trail. But some of those are even pretty stout, but down here in the South, and once it's wet, like, you have to stay kind of committed into you're willing to yard sale this thing just to get out of certain spots because of the mud that's here. There's not that much traction, so you got to have some oomph behind whatever you're driving and willing to dent body panels just to get out.
So after Kenworth, you got hooked up with Dan and started working there. And was that the old? Wasn't a gas station? It was like an old car dealership or something, wasn't it?
No, so the first shop was the back of a forklift shop. So, like, they sold forklifts and they did, like, forklift repairs on the front side. And we rented, I want to say it was maybe 1,800 square feet or 2,000 square feet, if that, from the back of this guy's shop. And it was perfect for, like, 2 vehicles, and you had room to work, kind of, but everything had to be put inside every night type of situation. So if you had something tore apart, everything else that you moved in and out had to be able to be brought back in. But, we built this, I want to say we probably did 5 or 6 buggies out of that shop, and then we moved to a more legit shop, which was, I want to say it was probably 15,000 feet or 12,000 feet, and we rocked that for a few years in, like, the early, I would say, like, 03, 04, 05, and then we moved to another shop, which was across from the high school in Dothan, so we could get kids from high school that would, like, intern after school, cutting tube or cleaning up type of, doing odds and end jobs, being more of a helper. But
right.
We did that till, like, 07. I ended up leaving and going drag racing full time. I always had a kind of a passion for drag racing because my parents raced as a kid, and I kind of wanted to get back in it, but not at a bracket level, like a bracket racer style racing. I would rather try to do, like, the big show stuff, and ended up getting picked up and got a full deal with a guy out of California, and I ended up leaving Blue Torch and did a full solid year. I want to say it was like 22 or 23 races we did that year, and you kind of have no life because you're chasing the next racetrack. That every day you're going somewhere to the next track, or you're servicing after a race on the weekend to go to the next race that you got to be at by Tuesday afternoon or something. And
so everything was either shop or racetrack.
Correct. Yeah.
And where was that at in California?
That was out of Ontario.
Okay.
So, like, east of
Hotbed.
Pomona. Yeah, east of Pomona by like 15 minutes. And
right.
So the guy I went to work for, his father-in-law is like one of the lead manufacturers in the drag racing world for making cylinder heads and engine blocks and rocker arms and stuff like that. So took a job with him as a, like, you're going to learn something instead of you're just going to take this off and put this on only, and nobody's ever going to show you anything else. And, I took it, and I worked with him till about 2018-ish, 19, and just fly in help after a couple years of full-time work, and it worked out really well. I ended up coming back to Blue Torch when Jason Carner bought it, and came back to Blue Torch, and he and I kind of ran it from, I would say, it's probably 2008 to, I went to Trail Gear in 2011 or 12, something like that.
Okay.
And, just trying to make sure that you're not leaving something on the table where you're working for somebody for something, but you're not getting ahead. And just, we didn't disagree on anything, Dan and myself, or Jason and myself. It was just more like see what else is out there, what other opportunities there were. So
right, when opportunities are presented.
Yeah, when they make sense and they check all the boxes that you require, then you kind of have to make that decision. And luckily, April and I, my wife, and we had our one son at the time, and our only son at the time, but he was young enough to where it was not a big deal to move because he wasn't in school or anything. So it was like it wouldn't be a bad idea to try it. You know, everything made sense. So she found us a place to live out there, and we moved out there and quickly realized that Fresno, California is not for me. And I didn't do my due diligence on everything in regards to Fresno, but you know, like a pre-checklist of what am I getting myself into with this move, and it worked out for the year. We did a bunch of racing and kind of got Matt more squared away on his race program, and then I moved back to Birmingham once Blue Torch moved to Birmingham, and Jason had gotten a big building, and you know, I moved back into Blue Torch like I never left, and ran it until it was sold to Peter Basler, and then I guess like in 2019 or 20, it ended up shutting down and whatnot. But you know, that's kind of the history of the Blue Torch situation.
Okay. And so when did you meet your wife?
2008.
2008. So after school, you're at...
Yeah.
And you met her where and how?
Here in Birmingham, she worked at a Logan's Roadhouse.
Okay.
Yeah. I used to be like a big gym rat and I ate a really clean diet and all that kind of crap, so I would splurge on Sundays, and I would go eat at that steakhouse on Sundays, and she was a waitress, and kind of the rest is history, you know, from that point. But
trying to make it so you didn't have to pay a tip, huh?
Exactly. I've just been paying her bills forever now.
Well, that's awesome. So then let's explore the racing aspect of your life.
Okay.
You know, let's jump into that drag racing time.
Okay. So in high school, I worked at a Jiffy Lube, if you want to call it, like an oil change shop, and that company had a drag boat team that they raced two different style drag boats, a jet boat and a V-drive boat, which run like a traditional big block Chevrolet, you know, 500-600 horsepower, and then they had another one that had it was probably a 1,000 horsepower boat, but that was fun for a little while. And then when I got to working at that truck shop right out of high school, the guy that was kind of the foreman had a buddy that raced an alcohol funny car. And growing up, when I grew up, those were like the next best thing to a Top Fuel car. And, you know, same kind of body, same power plant, just a different type of fuel, and not as much horsepower, but still an ungodly amount of power for what you're trying to do. But so we got hooked up with this guy, and we would go match racing, which used to be a really big thing. And you know, you would go to a race, and it would be a quick 8 show or something like that, where they'd take the top 8 qualifiers or fastest guys of this weekend are going to race together tonight, you know, and just kind of picking up a wrench where you can and doing whatever somebody asks you to do, just kind of getting your foot in the door to where you can kind of come back next race and do the same job without somebody having to explain to you what you're doing or how to do what you're doing, and, you know, move my way up from that. And then this guy started racing a little bit more serious and would race more of the divisional races with the NHRA, and we would go to the division races, and we would qualify really well. We would probably lose second round normally, and it kind of sucked. But the guy that we would normally lose to was like the man in the class, and later on down the line, that's the guy I ended up going to work for forever. And it was basically, I met him at Vegas at a national event, and told him I want to go do this for real and not kind of just play at it. And he's like, well, good, because I'm looking for a guy next year. I know you're from back east in the southeast, and I'd like to maybe put something together and you work on my car. So working with him, he showed me a bunch of stuff, of the right ways of doing things, and then everything I learned, just leave it in your bag, don't use it, just kind of do it the way we do it, and then I'll explain to you why you do it the way you do it, the way we do it. So if there is an issue, you'll find it before it becomes a problem. You know, at 270 miles an hour, there's issues that happen, but you don't want it to happen on the track. So you're kind of a one and done deal. If you, whatever job you're doing, if there is an issue with it and it comes apart, it, wrecks the car, totals the car out, or you blow up something, things happen at a crazy speed, and a lot of that stuff is fixable before it ever becomes a problem, and a lot of that is just prep, and we would tear the car down to the chassis every weekend and pull all the wires loose, look at every single thing, put it all the way back together, and kind of nothing ever went down the track without it ever being inspected, whether it was a new part or not. You would tear it all the way apart and put it all the way back together and say, yep, everything was good. And then all it is that peace of mind to know that those parts are good,
Yeah, that was an alcohol funny car?
Yeah.
So you're running 220 miles an hour plus?
Yeah, 260 to 270 normally.
Yeah. One of the things I always tell people is that, rock crawling compared to racing, when things go bad, they go bad in a much smaller way. Like you break a link bolt, you broke the bolt. We can get you off course, fix the bolt or fix the link or the mount or whatever happened to go, and you don't tear everything else up. You get into racing, you break a link bolt, and the next thing you know, you've destroyed a shock and, maybe the corner of the car, but at 260 miles an hour, something breaks. It's carnage.
Yeah. That's kind of like it's a really good practice for like prepping cars, because like the way I prep cars even to today, it's like you should start at the front end and tear it all the way apart, and then look at every single thing and magniflux every single moving part that has a stress part to it. And then if everything is good, when you put it in, the date that you put it in, and then at the end of this date life that this part has that you're going to make up, it's trash. Like, you don't put it in the trailer as a spare, you put it in the garbage and you start over, because the second you pull it off the shelf, it's got, say, it's only got the hammers on it, man. That's what a lot of people say. It's only got 80 miles at the hammers. Well, that tells you it has been beat like crazy. It's not a oh, okay, I only went to this trail ride and we didn't do anything. Well, I start at the front end and move to the back end, and if you can find somebody that will actually prep a car like that, you don't have failures as often. Yes, you have failures, but like they're either overlooked or they were looked at and decided they were good, instead of something catching you completely off guard.
Right. And it's amazing how small of an item can ruin somebody's race, especially at KOH.
Oh, dude, 100%.
I mean,
100%.
A $3 part can ruin a $50,000 effort.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people don't understand. That's what kind of drives me crazy about a lot of the racing stuff, is like there is absolutely nothing wrong with being a participant, but don't tie up a lot of people's effort if you just want to be a participant and not actually try to give it everything you got. You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing if you and your buddy want to go to the Hammers and race it or try to do a series, but don't involve people that also strive to be the best or want to be the best and put in all the effort to do it only for somebody to go, it's not a big deal, we called it, or we're going to fix it down the road. Like, that's my part of it. Like, I suck as a spectator, and I don't like people that quit.
Right.
Like, if it's there, you can fix it. Now, you might have to do some low-down, dirty stuff to make it work, but you have to know how to do that. So.
Yep. So let's go through the phases of what you've done.
Okay.
From like the first days at Blue Torch to what you're doing now with each one of the, not year by year, but I know you've had your hands in racing and fabrication for a long time, and a lot of different levels and stuff. So give all of us an idea of the things that you have done.
Well, I guess the beginning would say like the very beginning of Blue Torch was a lot of trail rigs that we built, quarter elliptical suspension, 4-link with quarter elliptical, and then when Blue Torch became a real business, the parts design and building some of that stuff was everybody that worked there basically had a hand in that. And then we would still do a lot of trail rigs, or taking a Jeep or an LJ and building it to 1 tons. And, the object was to build the like, say you brought in a Jeep to build, we would build it, but at the same time we would build a parts list that would be sold, off the website or whatnot. And that's kind of what Blue Torch was we were always building something to make parts for the next guy or the website or whatnot. But then we got into when Bender came to work there, Rob Park.
Right.
He came, and when he came to Blue Torch, he brought the Websters, like rock crawling style stuff to the shop, and as an idea or possibility of building them a car. So we built one car for her, for Becca to drive, and that got us into the rock crawling world, which, you just kind of opened up avenues of new people. And we got in with the Websters, and then we met Nicole Johnson, and then that kind of planted a seed to where, accelerate that down a little bit, you get to King of the Hammers, and now Nicole's driving a Blue Torch car. It just kind of opens your doors to where you're doing other things. But the whole Red Bull Rock, I think it was the Rocker, the gray one we built, and we loaded it up and took it to Boyd, Texas, and did one of your events.
Right.
And,
the Concrete Bowl.
Man, that was pretty eye-opening for a lot of us that never got to see, like, the real side of wheeling. This is back when you had, like, you get the DVDs off of hauling or crawling videos and stuff like that, and it was like, man, these guys are crazy, or like the Pirates of the Rubicon videos, and you're just like, man, these guys are crazy. But that was like the next closest thing that you could see that, like, in real life. It's very eye-opening that you could drive a vehicle in these certain situations, and you're shooting guys out of that bowl that's basically straight up, and pretty eye-opening. But I think we ended up popping a motor at that race, and we found a junkyard motor, and then I think you might have even hooked us up with a barn to use at some farmer's place, and we went there and swapped a motor out and came back to race the next day, or do the course the next day. It's like a whole lot of stuff goes on in the background of these things that not too many people know about.
It is true. Like, how did this happen? Like, well, these guys worked till this morning to get it together. And that's one of the things that's always driven me nuts about, trying to get television for rock crawling. Everybody goes, oh, live coverage, so you can see the guy run on the course. Okay, that's cool. If you're another rock crawler competitor that can't make that event because you're on the other side of the country or whatever, but trying to get the television producers to know that it's more than just scores and results, but the drama that goes on, the week leading into an event, the event itself. I mean, there's so much happening that has nothing to do with what's on course, except 100%. Trying to get there.
Yep. 100%, man. that would be its own TV show, and then the extra would be the actual event.
Right.
You know?
Well, and that's what we tried to produce, and then Harvey Weinstein gets busted for that, at the beginning of that Me Too movement stuff, and the company we thought we were going to get that could really put it together and had the same mind as us, it all dissolved. And then since then, I haven't been able to get that kind of group together again. So no TV, because I wasn't willing to sell out and be part of the fakeality stuff,
Right.
I didn't want to do that. I don't need Ice Road Truckers and American Chopper on the rocks. It doesn't make any sense.
No. And I don't think it would do any justice, because the people that are actually involved in it would see the holes in your show and know that it's not real.
Right.
So
then after Blue Torch and the rock crawling.
Yeah. So we came back to from drag racing. I came back to Blue Torch and did the two-seat car that we built that Nicole drove, and she drove it at the Hammers, and then I ended up wrecking that car not pre-running, but like shaking the car down and trying to get the suspension somewhat right and being completely green to everything, and taking a lot of input from Troy Johnson at the Fab School on how to drive one of these cars correctly instead of just, figuring it out. And I was driving the car at a pace that I was very comfortable at driving at, and Frank was riding with me, Nicole's husband, and we got kind of a bad bounce out of this little washout, and it kind of passed the back end past the front end, and we didn't wad the car up by any means, but it took a tumble and needed an upper link and messed some panels up and stuff. But we loaded up, went to the Fab School, and they cut some tubes out, fixed some things, because it had a big rolled roof on it, and then the steering was kind of oversped for what was comfortable. Like, the input was too touchy, and Jeff Howe ended up fixing all that for us and getting it to where you could drive it right. And when we got back home, we cut it all apart and put a flat roof on it, and then put the steering box under the driver's seat to make it have like a Class 8 style swing set steering, so it had a gearbox and a ram assist. And that was like the best thing you have ever driven, coming from a Ram at that time, or doubling the Ram. And then we did the Vegas to Reno, I think it was 09. So we built that car in 08 for Nicole to drive. I think it was 08. And then 09 we did Vegas to Reno, and then Rob Mack drove the car with Larry McRae at the Hammers. And what else? I think they popped the motor at King of the Hammers, and got it back home and put a different engine together for it and changed the transmission. I want to say it had a 700 R4 back then, and we went to a turbo 400. And because you have like that rock crawler mentality where you got to have stupid low crawling, but at that time you didn't, because of the Hammers wasn't really technical rock crawling. It was more of you kind of have to have that bump every now and then, like where you had to hit it with some speed, and
right, push it through.
Yeah, super steep first gear and low 5-to-1 transfer case is dumb, But now now you've got guys running the Hammers with a 1.5 case. It's like the times have changed, So,
right. But you also got guys doing 130 in the across the lake bed.
Yep, yeah, like very effortlessly.
Yes.
That's about what Tom and I run. I think it's 134 was this past year, and that's like nothing. That's when you eat and drink. As crazy as it is.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So then, were you building transmissions as well, or did you have?
No, I was
built?
using Hughes Performance was doing the transmissions.
Okay.
Because kind of Shannon Campbell and Nick Campbell kind of set the bar on a bunch of that stuff, where they had, these are the companies that we're using. And, Turnkey did a bunch of engine work for us, and then They were using Hughes, which is basically a local company to those guys, and their stuff seemed to work. So everybody was kind of doing that, and we got on that program for a while, and then we started having engine issues, I would say, and then started doing them ourselves, and that was when you start bringing everything in-house to do that type of stuff, like when Peter and I raced the single-seat car and the JK at near the end of Blue Torch. It was all built engines from the shop instead of running something that somebody else built and said was good, and didn't have any issues really with any of that. And it took a little while, a few years, to figure out like driveline combinations that work, that aren't picking on certain parts or pieces, or if they are, what you can get lifetime out of this part, and you change it before it fails.
Right.
But,
okay. And so you outsourced transmission work, but you started doing the engine work yourself.
Right. Which is what my dad did when I was a kid. My dad grew up. I grew up watching my dad build engines and tuning carburetors and stuff like that at the drag strip. So like the nuts and bolts side of the engine is not real intimidating once you understand what you're trying to accomplish. What the application of this engine is to do, then it's not that hard to figure out. But I think a lot of the early stages of the crate motor game was, this motor works great for this, but it doesn't work great for that. But feel free to try it, and you kind of figure out like the mileage that you can get out of an engine in the environment that we run in. Like to get 1,000 or 1,500 miles out of an engine is doing something, and a lot of people don't understand that. Like as crazy as that number is, if you can get 1,500 miles out of an actual race engine, you're doing it.
And
like normally filtration is not good enough to do that.
Right. On both ends, on air and lubrication.
100%. Yeah. I mean, just look at the environment that you run this thing in. Like, you're basically treating it like a rental car with full coverage insurance every time you crank it up.
I don't think there's a few areas that I would never buy a rental car from, and that's anywhere where there was off-road racing or rock crawling events.
Or drag races.
Drag races too. Yeah.
Your deal with it, yes.
So you fly into one of those towns where any of that's going on, you just kind of go, okay, I'll rent it, but I'll never buy from that rental car company.
Exactly.
Even if it's like a 8-passenger van or something, no way.
Exactly.
Because it was filled with more than that, and everybody beat on it.
Yep.
So then the engine building, that what kind of work did you do at Trail Gear?
So at Trail Gear, I just ran his race program. It was just trying to get his new car, which was that IFS car that Brian Kirby built, and just trying to get it to where it's competitive. Like the year before I came out there, that's when he had his accident at the Hammers and got all banged up and all that kind of good stuff. But fixing a lot of the little stuff that needed to be fixed on that car, just from like the package, more or less, like the combination of the motor, the transmission, and the converter, and the gear ratio was a little off. And then just Matt kind of gave me free rein to put something together that would work. And I went back to what I know with what we were running at the Blue Torch stuff and started there. And I think we won 4 or 5 races that year with him driving them. And we went to the Hammers, and I think we went to the Hammers like 5 or 6 times. Like we would test tune shocks with King like on Thursday or something like that in Barstow, and we'd go to the Hammers and spend the weekend at the Hammers just running like the prior year's lap and just putting miles on the car. And then came race week, we get to the Hammers like on Thursday, and they give us the race course on Friday, and we're out pre-running, and the car catches on fire, and about mile 20 something of the first lap, and right before you got to the big desert section, and the car is basically engulfed in flames from behind, and Matt's telling me that the car is losing power, and like I had all the gauges on my side of the car, and I was like, everything on my end looks like it's good, and then it just died. And when it died, it came to a slow stop at like 90 miles an hour, and we were engulfed in flames, and it was pretty wild to get out of that situation and get the fire put out. Once it burned the whole back of the car off, but once it got through the coolant hoses, it was enough water above the motor in that radiator to kind of get it down to where the dirt and the sand you're throwing on it was able to kind of contain it. But it's kind of scary for a minute, and then we got it put out, and we got towed back to camp, and Matt was like, well, kind of that sucks, and I guess we'll just load it up and go to the house. And I was kind of more like, no, that ain't how we're going to do this. And I called a buddy of mine at Turnkey, and I was like, man, I need all these parts. Do you have them? And he's like, yep. I'm like, okay, well, we're going to come down there. It's bad. And we get down there, and we tear the back of the car apart, get the motor out of it because it melted everything on it, and went to repairing everything and got it all put back together, and then showed back up at the Hammers like 2 days later, and I think we qualified 7th that year with no pre-run time on the car because of all the issues that we had, and finished 10th that year. But we didn't have a single gauge in the car that you didn't need, and Matt didn't have any real input in on how it was set up. It was just drive it, which is pretty cool because I met a lot of people through the whole trail gear situation that were big comp crawler guys, like Justin Hall and all those kind of guys, like Aaron Sykes, stuff like that. But they were helping with pit stuff, and Matt wanted to be the guy in the pit. When you roll in the pit, like the driver wants to make sure everything is great. And I was very clear, like, this dude doesn't need to know anything. You just need to smile and say everything looks great. And if the tire's hanging off of it, fix it, but smile while you're doing it so he doesn't freak out, because I've got to deal with this guy for the next 8 hours. And we nerfed Chicky Barton in the desert, and it broke the side of the winch off. Like at the last 4 feet of us coming into to nerf Chicky at like 50 or 60 miles an hour, he kind of went to the right, and it took the motor side of the winch off. So like the gearbox side of the winch off, and we're hauling mail through the desert, and next thing you know, there's like 6 or 8 foot of winch rope with the shackle just banging off the hood. I'm like, oh my God, you got to roll your winch in. So he like hits the winch, and you can kind of hear it in the radio, like in your earpiece, pick up the winch is moving. I'm like, okay, that's probably good, and another 5 minutes go by. Now there's like 15 foot hanging out. And I'm like, I think you went the wrong way on the winch. So he's just holding the button down the other way. I'm like, okay, that's got to be good. And I radio into pit, and now there's 20 feet out, and it's over the top of the car. And I'm like, man, we get into pit, just figure out what's wrong with this winch. There's no, it's not reeling in. So the guy in pit's like, okay, man. So we pull into main pit at the Hammers, and I unplug my helmet from the car, so Matt can't hear me and the guy talking. And the guy comes over, and he's like, man, your winch is no good. And I'm like, okay, what's wrong with it? He goes, it's broken half. And I'm like, wrap it up, and let's go with it. And he's like, okay. So he's out front wrapping it up, and Matt plugged my helmet back in, and Matt was like, what'd he say? And I said, man, he said everything looks good, and we're good to go. So we leave pit, and I love Matt to death, but he would have freaked out if he knew it was broke then. We would have gone back out, and we go out, and we get to the top of Wrecking Ball, and the car just won't do the climb. And he's like, let's just winch it. I'm like, no, we're not going to winch it. You're going to back up, move over 2 feet to the right, and it should one shot around the top rock, pivot rock at the top. And he's like, okay. And he goes, if it don't go, we're going to winch. And man, it goes. And I'm like, thank God it made it. And we get all the way through. We come up Chocolate Thunder, and we kind of put the car on the door. And Matt's like, let's winch it. Let's just not risk it. I'm like, that ain't an option. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, that ain't an option. And the next thing you know, we get pushed over back on the tires. And it was like Aaron Sykes and those guys pushed us back over. And we get to going, and the course worker guy was like, you're good to go. Kept the traffic rolling, and we finished the race. And I was like, man, that winch got broke like mile 9. And that's why we couldn't winch. And he's like, why didn't you tell me? It's like, because you would have quit, And the first race I raced with him, man, we had went to that, it's somewhere in New Mexico, the Cinco de Baja race they did.
Right.
And, we got the pole because of the random draw or whatever. And we started losing oil pressure like the 5th lap. Well, like the way that car was set up, like if my hand was on my left leg, like if I bent my knees, my left hand was on my left knee, I could cover up the oil pressure gauge. So as the whole time it's blinking, I could just cover it up. And Matt would be like every 40 seconds, what's the gauges look like? What's the gauges look like? And man, they look great. The whole time I'm not even looking because I know what's behind me is dying a quick death. And every time he'd put it in 3rd gear, I'd knock it back to 2nd. Like, keep the RPMs up, man. Like, don't lug this thing. And he's like, oh, okay. And then we get through the finish line, we win the race, and when he comes through the finish line, he gets off the gas. It's done. The motor locks up. It's over with. And he's like, what happened? I said, man, we lost oil pressure like 40 miles ago. You've been getting by with about 4 to 5 pounds of oil pressure. He's like, why didn't you say anything? I said, man, that's a long walk. Sorry about your luck, but we did just win the race. And then what we came to do, it's only got to run today. Like, it doesn't matter if it doesn't run tomorrow.
Right.
But that's the style of racing I try to do, where you leave every single thing on the table instead of like, man, if I'd have just, if we'd have just kept going, we'd have probably finished. Instead of like, you got to try, and you kind of got to know what you can get away with parts and pieces wise, and then you got to be quick on your, thought process of what can you omit out of a car and not.
Right. So then, after Trail Gear,
yep.
what was you went back to Blue Torch?
Yeah, I came back to Blue Torch, and then brought a bunch of racing stuff from the Trail Gear stuff because we did all the IFS car stuff. I raced the F-Toy at Prairie City at Goodby'sville at the NorCal series, and then did some cone stuff with you guys at like Donner, and then one in Arizona. I can't remember that one, but just some more experience type stuff, and then came back to Blue Torch and was just doing the parts side of stuff and helping in the shop where needed. And Peter and Jason wanted to do some real racing, so we start putting the car together to do the real racing. And we go to the Hammers, and Peter and Jason and myself are going to split driving duties with the single-seat car. And I winch up the right side of back door, and I end up breaking a lower link on the second step up, 6 minutes into the race, and backed up, and Goodby's looking at me like the drive shaft just come flying out of this thing. And so I back up and get all the way over to the right of the second wall, so I'm kind of out of the way, and I basically run back to main pit with this link that I need to have welded together or clamped together or something to get me going. And when I get back to camp, like Dave's trailer is parked kind of near ours, and there happens to be an aluminum link that's got 1.25 inch heims in it that looks like it'll work. So we confiscate that basically, and I go back to the car, and it's like 6 or 8 inches too long for where it needed to go in the tab. So I just said, screw it. I just stuck it in the chassis, and I ratchet strapped the chassis to the link, like the axle to the chassis wedged in there to where it can't come out. You know what I mean? Like if it comes out, you got other problems anyways. And I did that and ended up getting out, but by that time it was like kind of all for naught. Ended up Jason and those guys ended up calling the race, but I drove it back to camp, and got home with it and fixed it correctly, and we built that JK, which was the 4500 class, which was the spare drive line to the single-seat car in it. So it was a big Cube LS motor, Turbo 400, the spare Atlas, and it was pretty stout for what it was. And we raced it. I raced it at the Hammers. Peter drove it for 4500 class, and then I raced it in 4400 on race day, but Peter drove the single-seat car. And it was basically nothing more than a parts wagon for the single-seat car. And, man, we had a lot of fun with that. John Gabriel co-rode with Peter for the 4500 race, and then I co-rode, or he co-rode with me for the 4400 race in that same car.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a good time. Just a lot of work to transfer from, they changed it over from a 37 to a 39, and then liners and all that kind of good stuff. Like, I commend the guys at BFG for swapping tires Thursday night to 40s for the next day. But
Didn't have a whole new set with liners and rims, huh?
no, I wasn't that big time, so I didn't have that many wheels and tires ready to go, so I just had to work with what I had.
So you
But it
brought
worked out pretty good.
the single seat out to Alabama. Not Alabama, excuse me. It was isn't that Georgia?
Oh yeah, Durham Town.
Durham Town.
Yeah, that was like the nastiest I've ever been in my life in a race car.
That was one muddy race.
Man, I tell you what. Yeah, I was telling the guy that was racing with me or helping me was James Vest. I said, man, I really, really, really don't want to qualify. Like, I will take a rear start just so I don't have to get in this car. Because, like, once I get in it, I'm not going to want to get out because you're going to be nasty. and he's like, okay, man, whatever you want to do. And then I think everybody else that was wanting to race was like, no, just let him go first and we'll go behind, or whatever that situation worked out to be. But yeah, that was a bad day. I mean, big cars don't work that well in the woods race of motocross track in the grand scheme of things.
Right. Sliding in and off the road, and
Man.
and then the owner showed up the next day.
Oh, that guy. Whew. I've never raced there that guy didn't have, a cussing match with somebody. And it's like, dude, come on, man. You have to be a special kind of dumb to not realize that when you turn something loose out here with 600-700 horsepower on your motocross track, that it's going to annihilate it for a few days. You're going to need to do some dress-up work.
Right.
Yeah.
And his tractor was the thing that caused the most problems. His tractor operator.
Yeah.
Because it was stuck out there.
Yeah. It was fun, though. I mean, I missed the days of racing in your series just because it was so much more laid back, and at times it was laid back. Obviously, there's another story in there for that, but it was a whole lot more laid back, not as stressful. You don't need 50 people to do the race, and you're not going to tear up that much stuff.
Right.
In theory. But
well, and our whole thing with Dirt Riot was to expose people that into the racing, the four-wheel drive endurance racing, that wouldn't get a chance otherwise.
Right.
And I think we did a good job at that. I remember one time we had like 18 racers out of 24, 25 finishers that had all got their start with us one year at KOH.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And that says something,
What I thought was pretty cool was back when you had to do pretty good in your series to get a chance to race the Hammers.
Yes.
I ended up getting one. I had to go to Texas to like seal the deal on getting the qualifying spot for the Hammers, but it meant something back then. You know what I mean? Like, you weren't just on the list because of who you were. You had to earn it.
Yep.
Which to me was a pretty good deal,
Right, and those were some fun times. We really enjoyed the racing aspect. Just too many cars decided not to keep coming back. They'd go race.
Yeah.
They'd get into Ultra 4 race. They'd refinance their house 2 or 3 times, and then they would sell their race cars and and never go racing again.
Exactly. Exactly.
But that's,
Yeah.
that's racing.
Yeah, the good part about the Dirt Riot series that you had over on this side of the country was the races. Like the furthest one was Durhamtown, really. I mean, you raced at Durhamtown and you raced in our backyard here in Birmingham, and that was perfect. Like didn't have to go anywhere. Could go home at night.
Yeah, and Grey Rock was always fun.
Yeah, heck yeah, it was. Racing that Jeep out there was kind of I felt like I was driving a D8 bulldozer through the woods, but something that's 90 inches wide or 92 inches wide. I don't know how I qualified on the pole and didn't, rip a corner off the car. But, that year I raced your deal with, I think it was Bill Baird was on the pole and I was right behind him in like the second lap or something like that. Bill's all spun out in the woods and he is trying his dangest to get this thing to go, and I pull up on him, and he's just like looking at me like, "Oh no!" And there was nowhere to go. Like his car was wedged in between two trees, and he was facing traffic, and one whole corner of the car was missing, like the right rear axle, left rear axle with the tube wheel and all was gone, and I ended up driving over the front of his car to go by. But when I came back around the next lap, come back up to the start-finish line where his truck and trailer was, he was gone. It's like, man, that dude didn't stick around for nothing.
Once we got him out, no, he didn't.
Like, holy crap, man, he's gone,
It was difficult to get him out of that spot.
Oh, I can imagine, because, like, running up on him, man, it was a bad spot to be in anyways, but that's like we would go to Texas and we race out there, another Bill Baird story. He gets upside down in this mud hole, and I come around and I'm like, oh God, like this is bad. Like the roof of this car is in the mud, like under the mud, and 4 tires are sticking up in the air, and I'm radioing into Peter like, hey dude, I think Bill Baird's car he's got to be out of the car, but like I think he's out of the race 100%, and I get the cruising like going down the road. Next thing you know, there's this dude that's half covered in mud. Like his legs aren't muddy, but the whole top of his fire suit and everything is muddy. Like he just took a dunk in the mud and got all the way back to main camp. And Bill Baird was always a good sportsmanship guy. Like cut up and talk to you about what he did. But it's like, man, that had to be scary as all get out. Single seat car, upside down on the driver's side. Like you can't get out. Like, how did you get out of this thing?
Yeah. He did. The only thing was he lost his helmet. Because remember, I told everybody if your car's upside down and you're away from the vehicle, you've gotten out and you're walking back, leave your helmet on the car so that everybody knew you were okay.
Yeah.
And that's when Daryl Gray pulled up, didn't see the helmet, pulled over, unbelted, and jumped in and searched the car for Bill to see if Bill was out of the car. Then got back in his car, and that was probably some of the nastiest smelling mud ever.
Dude, it was like straight sulfur mud, man.
It was bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff, man.
So tell us what you're doing now.
So now I had when I let my Blue Torch fizzled or whatever, I got a building, 5,000 square foot building, and just been doing the normal parts deal, like selling parts and brackets and tabs and stuff like that I've done forever. And the end of 21, like near the end of 21, I ended up selling that business and just started doing the Schofield performance deal where bought a chassis dyno. I do a bunch of engine work, a lot of gear work and, engine tuning, fuel injection stuff, and putting combinations together for people that race in Ultra 4 that normally would never, have the ability to do it from the East Coast, to have a good combination that works to start out, or have somebody on the West Coast that sends you an engine and you build them and tune them and ship them out. And that's kind of what I enjoy doing, is playing with the engine and doing the tuning. And I prep a few Ultra 4 cars, and I do a lot of the tuning and stuff like that for a lot of guys in the Ultra 4 world that, you don't have to have every car here or run a sticker on everybody's car to get by. So, I mean,
Right.
that's kind of doing it over here in the dark type of situation where you tune a lot of people's stuff or you build a lot of people's engines and do a lot of gear work for people, but you're involved in so many different cars and classes that, I can't keep up with who's doing what at what race, really.
And then are you still running with Tom Ways? Is he still running?
Yeah, so we ran, so obviously my accident in 21,
Right.
we had, I basically had a year of not being able to do anything, and pretty well healed up from that 100%, I would say, on about everything. My back's got some issues, but it's not the end of the world, but was able to get back in the car last year, and which was great. It's kind of a weird deal, like going back to the hammers and seeing everybody that had either, called, checked in on me or took care of my wife or helped my wife with logistics or what you need to do, how you need to handle this, or, hey, man, we're just sending you dinner, those kind of things. It was great to be able to like shake those people's hands and tell them thank you and stuff like that. But like the car sitting there, it's like, okay, same car, same deal. And, okay, like let's go pre-running. And we get in the car and it's like nothing ever happened. And, in my opinion, like getting back on that horse is like the best thing you can do. Like a lot of people, man, that race Ultra 4 were like, you need to just hang it up, dude. Like that hit too close to home. And it's like, man, like you can't quit. You know what I mean? Like you can't quit like that. Like you would rather quit by doing something good, coming back from that and doing something good and saying, hey, you know what? I'm done with the race side of it. I'll stick to doing something on the sidelines type of situation. But that drive of wanting to do it has always been there. And my wife is, kind of the baddest chick I know and, like, overly supportive of, no, this is what we do. Like, this is how we eat. This is what we do. And this is all we know how to do. So right, wrong, or indifferent, we're going to race. And this is what we do. And a lot of her friends, man, have been kind of like, well, that's kind of weird. You're going to let him do that again. And she's like, what do you mean let him do that? Like, this is what he does. My
awesome.
life doesn't work, and, what's kind of crazy is, like, she's never really been, like, in the not say limelight, but she doesn't know who's who in all of this. And to be thrown to the wolves last year, or a year and a half ago, it's kind of crazy that all these people that, even listen to your podcast or Wyatt's podcast we race against, stuff like that, you never know where you stand with certain people or people in general until something bad happens. And to be the guy that received all the benefits and, like, the people helping out, it's overwhelming, man. Like, I'm not one to ask for help, like, I'll just figure it out type of situation, but you got people that are like, quit being a dumbass and just take the help. And you're like, okay, like, I get it. Like, I don't know how to accept it, I guess you'd say, in the like the most proper way. So it's like, hey, we're sending you guys dinner. And it's like, okay. And they're like, what do you guys want? It's like, man, I don't know, just something easy. It's like, no, we're not sending you something easy. We're going to send you something that's going to be good. It's like, man, you're talking to the wrong guy. Like, we'll eat, sandwiches. Like, I'm not asking for that, and like business-wise, like people that I had in the shop, like vehicles I had in my shop, like they were overly understanding of the situation, but at the same time, they weren't like pulling out, like, people that I was helping on their cars or whatever, or doing the tuning and stuff like that. Like, they weren't like all of a sudden bailing, and it was like the people that are loyal to you when you're down are pretty solid individuals, in my opinion, and it's like, took me a while to get back up, to the shop, but once my wife dropped me off at the shop, it was good because I was still in a walker and stuff like that, but getting all that, worked out to where I can get back some stamina again in my legs and my back, it was, once I got to that point, it was like, I got a goal, and the goal is to get back in February, and you know, if Tom or Dylan or Tony of Icon would say yeah or not, then that was the deal. Like I'm going to show up and you're going to have to tell me no. Instead of like, well, let's put this other guy in, you know, which he had another opportunity, a guy to race with him, but like he had other opportunities for people to race with him. But Tom was like, no, if he's ready, he's getting back in. And it's like, you know, like that's pretty legit in my opinion. So getting back in the car at 21 or 22 was great. And I think qualified like mid-20s or something like that, and ended up finishing 10th, 9th or 10th, something like that. And I did the first lap and then ran, I guess it'd be remote pit 2 or something like that. And, you know, as an option, if you needed it, I'd get back in. But I told my wife I'd call her in like 4 hours after the race started because I'd be getting out. And then we come back in down Resolution and bypass around back door, and Tom's like, man, I don't think I'm ready for you to get out. I'm like, Tom, I'm not married to you, buddy. And he's like, I understand. I was like, after last year, dude, I better just get out and make a phone call, and I'll be ready to go when you're ready. And he's like, sounds good, you know, and then come through the short course and radio into the guy, Jake, that ended up running the second, third lap with Tom. I was like, hey, man, I'm getting out, so get ready. And we came in and we got fuel and some back tires, and that guy hopped in and checked out.
Awesome.
So,
and
yeah.
what's happening in 23?
I would say 23 would be much like 22, hopefully. Tom and I talked a little bit, and if everything works out on my end, we'll just be, I would say, in the car the whole time. As long as my back will stay together, I'll do the whole thing. But that's the plan, you know. Still doing some drag racing stuff with Fletcher's car, but he's pretty good. Like I keep all his stuff in my shop, so as long as everything's good with it, and we're not doing any preseason testing or nothing like that, then the hammers will work out. Because the hammers has always worked out kind of funky with drag racing, because the first real race of the season is the same weekend of the hammers 90% of the time, and
Is that
you would end up
what they call winter nationals?
Yeah,
Pomona?
you would end up. Yeah, you would test in Phoenix or Vegas, and you might be there a week or two early, and you know, service a car, assemble a car, and then go preseason testing and try different combos, and then tear it all apart, prep it again to go to the first race of the year. So the hammers was always like, if you were to do it, you would show up to do the day of, and I don't think that very justifies getting into the car, you know.
Right.
Like Tom stuff, like you're there like a week and a half, 2 weeks early, and you get to pull all the panels off the car. You pull the third members out. You make sure every single thing is legit, and then you put it back together and you go race it. So when it does have an issue, Tom is the most like will figure some stuff out kind of guy in the race car, but you're not wanting that, you know what I mean? Like you're wanting him to just solely drive. Like just shut up, eat your food, and drink your drink, and I'll handle that. And Tom and I have that kind of relationship where he's like, okay, and he'll just sit there and do his deal while I'm working on what I'm doing, or he can go, you know, talk to the people that powers that be of whatever he's wanting to do for sponsorships or, you know, whatnot. And when he comes back, the car is ready to go. And the guys that Tom has assembled to work on his race car are pretty legit people. And if they say this is what it is, and that's what it is. There's no, well, this weekend it's this guy pulling this tire off or this guy doing this pit spot. You know, it's like the same people all the time. And you get into that routine of, you know, like, hey, this guy does this, and, you know, Colt does this, and Jan does this, and this is how we're doing it. And you know who to talk to, who's ahead at what pit, and they can kind of tell when you talk to them on the radio what is severe and what's not severe, and you can put it in terms that they can understand it, and you know what you're talking to. You know, like they know what you're talking about by the way you're talking to them. So
right,
it works out really well.
So do you have to do with Tom like you did with Matt, and you know, kind of hide maybe what's happening behind you, or do you just or with him, Tom's more proactive?
I would say Tom is not easy to BS. You know, where Messer running 100 miles an hour in the whoops or 110 in the whoops is kind of on the front of the seat. You know, Tom is going to be like one hand on top of the steering wheel and the other one trying to figure out how to open this pack of, you know, gummies. And it's like, what are you doing? You know, where, you know, there's certain spots in the race where Tom's like, take the wheel, I'm going to drink and I'm going to eat, you know, and okay, we're running 80 miles an hour. I'm steering and navigating while he's eating and drinking. And then when he's done, you know, he'll burp in your freaking ear set like he has no house training, and then you go on about your business, you know. But like that's just how it is, man. Like
I totally see Tom as that. I've known him a long time. I'd say we're friends, but we're not, you know, super tight or close or anything. But you know, we've known each other for a long time. You know, he rock crawled with us and with a trail rig and all that kind of stuff. But he, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Solid individual, man. Like if it went down, if something bad went down, that's the dude you want on your side.
Right.
You
Absolutely.
know what I mean? Like whether it's, you know, killing something in your house with a hatchet or
chasing bears.
Exactly. Or trying to get you out of the desert after you get all busted up. So
right.
Yeah.
So what else you got going? The life good down there in Alabama right now?
Yeah, so basically my kids, my little boy is kind of picking up some tuning input from me on the chassis dyno side of things, and, you know, he's been able to tune a few cars remotely, and I let him operate the dyno, like the vehicle on the dyno, whether it's an off-road car or a pickup truck or something that we're tuning, but he's learning the ropes of how to do that kind of stuff to where hopefully one day I can kind of take a step back and let him run with it. And he's 11 now. He's been tuning cars for about a year and a half, 2 years, and he gets it. You know what I mean? He understands it, which is amazing. And he kind of shows interest in coming to the shop every day that he can, and whether it's to sweep up or just to hang out and hear the other guys talking that, you know, the shop talk of what we do and why we do what we do and how you do certain things. And he understands it. And then I've got my little girl, Lexington, that is 7, and she's into dance and cheerleading and wants to play softball, wants to do every single thing. But she comes to the shop and, you know, she sweeps up, runs the dust mop, and kind of just bosses people around like that's what she's supposed to do. And, you know, at the end of the day, like my goal as a father is like I want my kids to be experienced in all these things that are considered extreme. So like drag racing, off-road racing, you know, being around things that are normally not a normal thing for somebody to be like, oh, my girlfriend's dad does this, you know, or my girlfriend knows what this is based on this, or, you know, that type of situation where you're not like shell shocked that, oh my God, that's an off-road race car, and oh, that's so and so. Like, I don't get like people to say like, oh, that's so and so, like we should get his autograph. Like that's the dumbest thing you can get is an autograph. Like you need to be on the same level as that person, and then they'll recognize you just like you recognize them. And don't like cater to certain people. Like make them respect you instead of just like walking up front and giving them, you know, the world. Like they need to earn it, and then when they earn it, they'll respect it, and they'll respect you for what you've had to do to get to where you're at. In kind of my situation, that's the way I look at it. You know, there's a lot of people that are in this off-road industry that are either bought their way in or kind of just got lucky, I would say, if you want to call it luck. I'm a firm believer everything happens for a reason. And if you didn't earn it, it doesn't last.
Right.
And
true.
That's kind of where I'm at.
And that's some good advice. You know, that what you're saying about, you know, guys needing to earn and how to earn it. You know, be real, step up, you know, and experience it. You know, if Yeah, I see I've been around enough different types of racing to know that there's people that can write the check, show up,
Yep.
and sit in the car and have no idea what's happening around them except
Yep.
driving it. And some of
Exactly.
those guys are great drivers, but they
Yep.
better have somebody in the vehicle with them that can help them when shit goes sideways.
100%. And a lot of races, man, have been come down to the person in the passenger seat. Like, how creative can you get with getting this car out of here or fixing this problem, or what can we use off of the car to get this other thing figured out? And you have to do some very, very low down, dirty work at times. And when you do it, you know that fix is only temporary, and then you fix it correctly. Where some of those guys, they'll do that kind of fix on a race, and then the next race they show up with the same stuff, and you're like, and you wonder why you don't finish, or you wonder why you're not placing, or your car's always broke, or you always got to work on it. You know, like, I'm a firm believer in, if you do all the prep work at the shop, you really don't have a whole lot to do at the track.
True.
A lot of races are won and lost at the track, or at the pit instead of at the track.
Yep.
Like working out of your shop or at your, like at the Hammers, like if you yard your car apart after qualifying to get ready for race day, that's like the best thing you could do. You know?
Forces you to prep.
Exactly. And people that build cars that aren't very thought out of serviceability, like the best thing you could ever do is buy a car from somebody that also works on them and builds them, because they're thought out to where you can actually get this part out without having to remove that part. You know, it's very serviceable. Like, the forethought into building a chassis is there for the race day type changes.
Right.
Yeah. But
Well,
yeah,
any recommendations for somebody that's an enthusiast but always wanted to get into, say, being on a team with KOH? How would you suggest somebody, that wants to be involved besides being a spectator?
I would say pick somebody that you think you want to work with and try to be a sponge. Like, approach somebody with a way of being open to the way they do certain things, and you'll probably learn something while being a part of something, whether you're working for a big name team or a very, very entry level team. Like, to me, I think if you go into something like that as an open mind, or you have a little bit of experience, because a lot of the guys that help at the Hammers, whether it's on Tom's team or anybody else's team per se, they all have some kind of a wheeling background. So, like, you want somebody that's kind of been around rock crawling, so they're not like when the car comes into pit and it's got two flat tires and stuff's going bad, like they're not just like overwhelmed, freaked out. Like, you want somebody that's just like cool, calm, and collective, and it's just like reaching for tools, doing the job instead of being all into their feels at that time. Emotions kind of get people hurt, in my opinion. So the more you're just completely mellow in a pit spot, like nobody yelling and cussing at somebody for not grabbing the right tool or the wrong zip tie or the wrong tape, like the reason you're having to yell is that guy's uneducated, so you never showed him properly what he needs to do.
Right.
And I think being a sponge and having somebody teach you the ropes is kind of a big thing to do, and it transfers from boat racing to drag racing to off-road racing or working in a shop. Like, if you see somebody sweeping up a pile of dirt, you should probably grab the dustpan. Like, you don't grab the other broom, you don't grab the shop vac, you grab a dustpan. Like, you kind of see where they're going with what they're working with, and then if that guy's taking a tire off and you don't see another one next to him, you probably should roll one over there. You know what I mean? Like, just a little forethought in that side of it, to where you're not a hindrance, you're actually a help.
Yeah, using some common sense.
Yeah, I think if you can keep cool, everything works out better. You know what I mean? Like, when it's crazy and hectic and everybody's running around and screaming and yelling, nothing gets done correctly.
True. Very true.
You know what I mean? And it's like, even if you wad a car up at the Hammers, you don't have to be freaking out about it. Like, kind of get your game plan, check your bearings, and know what's going on, and kind of go from there.
So, is there anything else that you want to talk about that we haven't touched on?
Oh, I don't know. You said something about a funny story you had.
Well, that was the one where the guy at Durhamtown,
Oh, that guy.
yeah, was
Oh, I
yelling
thought
and
you were
screaming,
trying
and
to.
you were standing there, and I was just like, okay,
Oh,
yes, okay, yes,
I
and
thought you were going
then
down
he
the
drove
hole
off,
of.
But
Yeah,
we
I
looked
thought
at
you were
each
going to
other
talk
like,
about the one, the protest I got at Durhamtown,
oh, I don't remember that one.
where I nerfed the guy and he brake checked me. I was on him for like 4 miles or something, and he brake checked me in the woods, and I wrecked the back of his car, and he broke the coilover off of the right front of my car. So I was running on a bypass and a coilover that was just riding on the side panel, basically. And I caught the guy again, like he rabbited me. I caught him again, and then next thing you know, James Vest, the guy that was helping me in the car, was like, "Hey, dude, I don't know what the hell you did, but these dudes are pissed." And I'm like, okay. And he's like, they're over at the trailer, like, they're ready to fight. I'm like, great. When I get done here in a little while, we can handle this. And I come in, and you were just like, all right. He's like, James, I want to hear your story. And I'm like, okay. So I kind of told you what the deal was. I was like, no, man, I caught this guy in the woods. And you said, you have a camera? I said, yeah, I got one on the dash. And you're like, okay, cool. And then you and Josh pulled the camera card, and you looked at it, and then you kind of like watched the video, and I had the siren on a toggle switch, and it ran for, a while. And then when I finally got to the guy, like the co-rider waved, and I backed off, and then it was like another mile or two. And then the guy finally just brake checked me, and I was, foot off his bumper. And I went under his car, broke the deal. And then you looked at the guy that owned the car that I hit, and was like, hey, buddy, that's actually not that bad. You should be thankful that's all you got wrong with your car. And then the guy was pissed, man. And we go to Grey Rock, and I'm racing the JK. And you had the safety meet, like the driver's meeting, and it was directed at me and that guy. And you were like, for anybody that doesn't understand how this game works, is if you hear the siren and you don't move, it is fair game. And they were like, well, that's, kind of BS. You're wrecking cars and this and that. And you're like, no. There's people that are here to race, and then there's people that are here to say they race. Like, you need to pick the side that you want to be on. If that's the side you want to be on, don't race the unlimited class. And then you're like, James is racing this Jeep called Fat Amy. It's got a big-ass bumper on the front of it, and he is not scared to use it. And then that guy was like, this is just BS, man. And it was funny. But I'll never forget getting protested after that race, and then the driver's meeting at the next one when you were like, oh my God, this shouldn't even be an argument. Like,
I had a few of those. There was one in Arizona. I won't mention names, but the guy came in after being nerfed, and he was really upset with the driver that nerfed him. The driver that nerfed him actually ended up taking himself out. And then the same kind of thing, we found out that he brake checked, and it ruined the guy that was trying to pass his race, and the guy had been on him for almost a near lap. So yeah, it happens that way, and I just wish people would understand. The time to race is before you're caught. When you're caught,
yeah, especially when you're 30-second intervals and I'm on your bumper, it's over with. Like, you have been caught long ago.
Exactly. So get over and then race. But to try to jackrabbit and race and drive over your abilities is only going to cause more problems.
And I see it all the time in these woods races, man. Like, I was on him, man. I was on him. It's like, but you never got him. You've got to get close enough. Like, the siren from 200 yards back does you nothing.
Correct.
So, like, you're just that guy. Like, you never quite made it, but you're that guy. And then there's people that, like, I'm a big believer in, like, the siren and then a wham all in one swift motion after I've been there. And the general public understands that when you're racing in an unlimited class, that's kind of how it goes. And having raced at like the best in the desert stuff, it is that way with a Jeep Speed, man. Like you don't understand getting hit by a trophy truck in a Jeep Speed that you're not technically supposed to be hit by. I never heard a single thing, and I got plowed, and it was Andy McMillan. It's like, holy crap, man! Like that, like he hit me like 30 miles an hour faster than the Jeep would ever dream about going. And after I felt him come off the back of the Jeep, like you heard the siren, and it was like, oh my God, like that's legal. That's how this has got to go, you know. And
He probably was on it, but it was going. He was going so much faster, the siren hadn't caught up.
Dude, it was bad. And then he, like at the end of the race, he was laughing about it. He's like, "Man, sorry about your Jeep, dude." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't even know how the door's still open. You know, you the body Jeep, you plowed me, man." But good stuff.
Good stuff. Well, James, I want to say thank you so much for spending the time today and talking to me, and and you know, sharing your history with all of our listeners. And it was good to catch up with you again.
Heck yeah, man. Thanks for having me, man. And likewise.
Yeah. Hope to see you again. I don't know if I'm going to get back out to the Hammers. It's just become too much of a zoo for me to deal with.
Yeah.
But I hope to catch up with you along the way somewhere.
Heck yeah, buddy. Sounds like a plan.
All right, James. Take care.
All right, buddy.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's another episode of Conversations with Big Rich. I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you could do us a favor and leave us a review on any podcast service that you happen to be listening on, or send us an email or a text message or a Facebook message, and let me know any ideas that you have, or if there's anybody that you have that you think would be a great guest, please forward the contact information to me so that we can try to get them on. And always remember, live life to the fullest. Enjoying life is a must. Follow your dreams and live life with all the gusto you can. Thank you.